Today is the final day of the church year, and if you don't have to turn in a report or anything like that, you probably don't care a whole lot. It doesn't impact your life a whole lot, other than you had to vote a couple weeks ago if you're a member. But we had an annual report that was sitting out in the thing, and I think I took them all for a board meeting the other night, but if you want one of those, we still have more. But just to give some numerical highlights from this past year at Rhinaz, we had about over 850 people at our extravaganza and Light the Night combined, if you combine those numbers, between volunteers and attendees. We had nearly 270, more than that really, but 270 or so youth involved in Upward and our new esports league that we had. We had almost a 10% increase in giving, which just speaks to the generosity of people. And if you knew the stories I know, and I'm not at liberty to share those stories, but if you knew the stories that I know at least part of that is because people have been responding to God. And their generosity is coming from that, so that's exciting. We have 13 active in our discipleship groups, or D groups as we call them. We had 8 new church members. We had 2 lives that were given to Christ at kids camp. That's awesome, right? You want to clap for that? We can be excited about that. And I think we had a great celebration of the 100 years that we've had so far at Rhinaz. And we're not looking for God just to slowly let us kind of fade into nothing. We're looking for God to continue to work in and through us, to continue to minister to the people that He has drawn to us and continues to draw to us. And so I think this is all very exciting, and God has just been faithful in this last year. Again, in that 100th year, we're just thankful for God's faithfulness, aren't we? Yeah. All right, 3 of you. We're good. Okay. Now, as exciting as those numbers are, I want to share a single line from a testimony that I received a couple months back that I think is pretty exciting. It said, "I joined a discipleship group or a D group, and it has changed my life." I share that with you because it's a testimony in my mind of what God has done, making an impact in someone's life, and not just impacting their life, but actually changing their life through Rhinaz. Now, numbers of participation and generosity, I think, are important, and they are good, and they are appreciated. But being a witness and participating and partnering with God to a life that is changed, I'll be honest, is what motivates me to get up every morning. Right? It's great to have all these programs, it's great to have people show up to things, but we are doing that so that lives can be changed. So to have a testimony that says my life was changed, to me, is what we're about. Right? I really want to spend the rest of my life making an impact in people's lives. And I want to take as many people with me into the kingdom of God. I don't want to show up and be like, whoo, I got here and I'm so glad. It's like, God, I'm coming with these other people that as much as it's dependent on me, I partnered with you to have this moment. I think often what happens in churches, and this won't be a surprise to you, and maybe it doesn't happen at this church, or maybe it only happened in the past, or maybe it just happens at every other church, is people like to label things, right? They like to figure it out. And so they would say, having someone have their life changed, well, that could be discipleship, or maybe that was evangelism. But I think there's a real danger in taking something that is so important and just making it a concept. We label it to make it a concept, like the concept of evangelism or the concept of discipleship, and we like to cut things up. But there is a real danger in taking something so very important and doing that, because when you label it, you can dismiss it. You can say, oh, that's evangelism, that's not my thing. Or maybe I'm not very good at it, and so you know what? That's what we like to do. We like to put labels on things, we like to categorize things, and think, here's what I'm good at, and you know what? We a lot of times dismiss things when we think, I'm not going to be very good at that, or I don't even like it. But Jesus didn't refer to evangelism, as we would call it, as a concept. He taught about this idea of evangelism relationally, right? He didn't just say, hey, here's this concept, you should agree to it. He talked about it relationally. He has this whole series of parables, if you read his words, and he talks about 3 different things. He talks about lost sheep, right? And if you remember the story of the lost sheep, you have the shepherd that leaves the 99 to go and find the one. We have a what would you call it, a print, a picture, something like that, a meme hanging in our foyer that depicts that very same thing, right? And then Jesus talks about a lost coin and the woman who basically turns her house upside down looking for the single coin. And then Jesus kind of finishes those series of stories of the lost son. And really, it's the ache of the father for the son who is lost, right? It's this ache of the father for a son that was lost. A few years ago, my family and I were at Disney World, and we hadn't been in the park very long. And if you've ever been there, you know you walk through the gates, and once you get past the initial thing, you start walking down Main Street, USA, and at the end of that street is the castle. So we're walking down, I think it was Main Street, USA, just kind of walking there. We hadn't been there very long. And we hear a man yelling. And we hear, Amanda! Amanda, where are you? And I look over and I see this completely terror-stricken man. Panic is running through his face, and he's frantically searching for what I imagine is his daughter. And he's hurried, he's running around, he's looking everywhere, and he's yelling, Amanda, Amanda, where are you? The panic in that father's face is the right response when your kids are missing, aren't they? Isn't it? He wasn't casual about it. He wasn't just kind of like, I'll get to it tomorrow. He didn't say, well, I'll let the professionals take care of it. There was an intensity and an urgency to him looking for his lost daughter. What we refer to today in the church as evangelism is really what it means to have the heart of the Father. Can you imagine if you're here in the beautiful Quad Cities and someone called you and said, your child or your children are trapped at the bottom of a heavy weight in another city, and you knew that I was there? You would pick up the phone and you would say, Scott, or Pastor Scott, or hey you, or whatever you would say. And you'd say, my child is under this weight, and I can't get to them. Can you? I know you're right there by it. Can you go get them? And maybe that you would entrust to me that I would have to go and reach them. I just tell you that story because I think that kind of describes what Jesus has done, is that his children are everywhere, and they are bearing the weight of sin and burden and shame and just the different things that go in it. And he's saying, I'm sending you to go and get my kids. Do you have time for it? Can you do it? Can you imagine if I got that phone call and said, well, I'm not very good at finding people. I'm not very good at, that's not my gift. I took a spiritual gift survey and getting kids out of like rubble, that's just not. Is there somebody that you could call to do that better than me? No. I would do everything in my power, and I might contact other people or might get some people to go with me, but we're going to respond to that. The heart of the Father is to believe those that are lost should be found. Those that are broken should be healed. Those who need the hope of Jesus should be given that hope. That's what it means to have the heart of the Father. But there is a question that gets asked in churches that is some version of this. It says if we organize our church, if we kind of structure the way we do things, if we try to change the way things look, if the church is about those that aren't here, then what about us? What do we get? The answer of what you get if you are a person that is in church following God, the answer is Jesus. You get Jesus. That is what it matters in coming to church. That is what matters in following Jesus, is that you get him. That is what you get. Those that are the most committed to Jesus' mission are those who knew him the best. Those who walked and followed Jesus were those who had the most intimate relationship with him. And so if you are intimate with Jesus, if you have a relationship where you're growing with Jesus, You're not going to be saying, hey, what do I get out of it? When we've been talking about it for 3 weeks, is that it's not about us. We take our eyes off of ourselves and say, Jesus, you're on this mission. How can we help? How many of you, whenever you have gotten a new vehicle or a new-to-you vehicle, how many of you sit down and read the manual cover to cover? Anybody? I only have my hand up just to, there's, Mike, I see that hand. There's only one, right? I had mine up just to encourage others, so. Now, how many of you did not read it at all until something went wrong? Honestly, that's generally how we live as adults. Now, you might have looked on YouTube or you might have looked on Google. That counts too, right? Yeah, right? But that's kind of how we learn as adults. We often operate on a need-to-know basis. And that's fine because if something happens that I don't know, I can acquire the knowledge either by looking in the manual, Googling it, or watching a YouTube video. I don't want you to miss this, but this is how we can also grow in purpose and partnership with God. It's as you dive into these deep conversations, as you have conversations with other people and you're sharing the gospel, then if people ask, well, what about this or what about that? We don't have to be embarrassed to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. We don't have to be embarrassed to say, I'll figure that out and let you know. When you do that and you go and actually research the answers that people are asking you in questions, you begin to know God better than you did before. Why? Because you're finding all these answers to questions. At M25, we were there in Kansas City a week and a half ago. John Maxwell gave a sermon on evangelism, and he said, when you join God in sharing Jesus, it will make you smarter. How? Because eventually, you'll learn all the answers to all the questions people ask you. Because you might say, I never thought of that. Or I've never researched that. And you didn't originally know the answers because you didn't need to know because you weren't bothered by it or you never thought about it. But it is in the context of mission that you look up stuff in the need-to-know basis. And it's in the context of being on mission with Jesus that we grow closer in intimacy with Jesus. In the church, though, what I have seen, and again, not this church, just every other church, but most of us think we're not smart enough and we don't know the answers. Right? You don't have to voluntarily say, yeah, that's me. But there are people that there's no shortage of people that if you say, hey, would you want to lead something? They'll say, I just don't know enough. Right? Rhea has what's the word? Enviable? Yeah, the enviable task of being our discipleship president, which is sometimes asking people if they'd like to lead a group or something. And she could probably validate for me that more often than not, the question, if you ask somebody unprompted or if they haven't come to you, is they'll say, I just don't think I know enough. And so what happens in the church is we often leave it to the professionals or we join more Bible studies to learn more. Right? Because we have this deficit and we feel like, I don't know enough, so let me join a Bible study to learn more. I'm not saying Bible studies are bad, but I'm saying our way of thinking sometimes is we just keep joining more Bible studies and more Bible studies and more Bible studies. And we've been in a Bible study for 65 years and we've never shared Jesus once because we don't feel prepared enough for the quiz. Some of us just keep studying for a test that we think that our friends are going to give us and that the world might stump us on, like for 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years, and we're studying and studying and studying because we don't have all the answers. And we just keep studying for this test. And either we think someone's going to ask us a question that we won't know the answer to, or we think when we get up to the gates of heaven that Peter's going to be like, here it is, your 200-question multiple choice test. Sit down, you have 30 minutes. The time begins now. And we're like, aha, I'm ready. Let me say that we as a church are not on mission to pass a quiz. I don't know if you heard me. We are not on a mission to pass a quiz. Amen? We are joining God to make an impact around us. And I believe that we are on a mission to gain weight. And that's why I get to be your pastor, because I get to show you what having a lot of weight looks like. No, that's a joke. Did I just say to gain weight? Yes, I did. But it's not the kind of weight that you think, and that's not why we keep bringing donuts, right? It's actually holy weight. Holy weight. Now this idea, I can't take credit for this idea. I didn't come up with this idea. This isn't the idea that I kind of came up with. It was actually a pastor named Kevin Jack, and he gave permission to share it, so I want to share it with you. There's a scene in Daniel chapter 5, and Daniel's in the Old Testament, and this prophet of Daniel has this whole story. And there's a scene in Daniel chapter 5 where King Belshazzar throws this huge party. Does anybody remember what happens does anybody know what happens at the party for King Belshazzar? Daniel 5. That wasn't one of your memory verses? Out of nowhere, you'll remember when I start talking, this hand appears out of nowhere and starts writing on the wall. And it writes 4 words. Oops. Wait, where am I? Yeah, that one. I can't even believe they had a camera there, but they did. And it had 4 words. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And no one at the party, first of all, this is kind of nightmare stuff, right? If you're having a party and all of a sudden a hand appears out of nowhere and starts writing on the wall, I don't know, that shows the finger. I kind of thought they might have a quill or maybe a chisel, something like that. Anyway, starts writing on the wall, right? And no one knows what those words mean. No one knows what Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin means. Nobody knows it. And so they find Daniel, because he had previously interpreted dreams for Nebuchadnezzar. And so they find Daniel, and he comes forward, and they're saying, can you interpret this for us? And he said, sure, I can, King. And so he starts with this. He says, this is what these words say. Mene means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. And then he says, Tekel means weighted. You have been weighed and found deficient. And then the next verse he says, Parsin means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And so what you have here is you have 2 punishments surrounded by the charge of the king. And the charge against the king is you have been weighed and found deficient. The judgment of God against this king is you had every resource and opportunity at your disposal, and you have spent your entire life partying and making it about yourself. You have had every opportunity to do good, to impact others, to serve others who needed it, and you chose to spend every resource at your disposal on yourself. The judgment of God against the king is your life is too light. You need to gain weight, but it's too late for him. I heard a pastor say, we should not count Christians, we should weigh Christians because they do not all weigh the same. Jesus said in John 15:15, apart from me, you can do nothing. And that's the idea that apart from Jesus, none of us can do anything to add weight to our lives, to have a bigger impact in the lives around us without Jesus. I think this is so important for us to understand as a church. If I am going to get stronger physically, I'm going to do it with weight, right? How many people go to the gym on a regular basis and lift weights? Look at it. We got people flexing and all kinds of things. How many people have ever been to a gym and lifted weight? Maybe that's what get more involvement there, right? And so if you want to get stronger physically, that's what you do, isn't it? You go and pump some iron. If I am going to grow, it's with weight. And when I increase the weight, what happens? The muscle grows more. I grow more. That's physically true, right? Yeah. I think that's also how it works spiritually. You grow with weight. You grow by accepting responsibility for things that you hadn't previously. That by claiming ownership over areas and arenas that were maybe outside of your view before, that you gain that weight. Now, there is a weight that most people carry, but it's the weight of sin, and it's the weight of shame, and the weight of guilt, and bitterness, and anger. That is the weight that weighs most heavily upon most people in the world, is they're under the weight of shame, and sin, and anger. I believe that my job as a pastor is to get the wrong weight off of you so we can get the right weight on you. To get the things off of your life that don't need to be there. To get the things off of your shoulders and out of your mind that weren't meant to be there and are weighing you down in all the wrong ways. Do you know how many times people say, you know what, I have these thoughts and I can't seem to get rid of them. And sometimes I just tell myself again and again, I hear this voice inside of my head that I'm not good enough, or I can't do this, or maybe that I should feel guilty, or blah, blah, blah. We have all those things in our head that just tell us every single day. And sometimes we say, and I'll say like, well, you could try to replace those with the Word of God. Like you could memorize some scripture. And they're saying, yeah, I tried. But that voice just keeps talking. But I'm telling you that you've been listening to that voice sometimes for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And it's going to take time to replace that voice with the truth. And that's the will of God, what He has in our word, in His Word. And that's why sometimes you have weight from the things that your voice is telling yourself. And I'm going to tell you that that's working in partnership with the devil, because he's going to tell you things, and he likes when you're defeated. He likes when you're saying, I can't do that. I must not be good enough for God. That's not what God actually has for you. But a lot of times that's what the devil will convince you. And so there are things that aren't meant to be weighing you down. There are things on your shoulders that are weighing you down in all the wrong ways, not so that you can just do whatever you want, though. Because that's what Jesus will do. He'll give you freedom to remove those weight. But it's not just so you can go and do whatever you want. The rest of the world will tell you that your freedom, that having freedom means you pick up at any moment and do whatever you want. Right? Like, you'll be told that's the ultimate goal. Get into a place where you can have financial what? Freedom. Get into a place where you can retire and have freedom of time. People think that's the highest achievement of success. But really, that is what it means to stop growing. We don't do well as a people when we don't have weight or when we don't have purpose to our life. The difficulty that comes sometimes with people with retirement is they lose their purpose. Right? You've met people. Their purpose was their job. Their purpose was their family. Their purpose was this thing and that thing. I'm not saying that can't be part of the picture, but for some people, they don't know what to do when they all of a sudden can't work and the kids have moved out. They're saying, I have no purpose. We don't do well when we don't have purpose. We don't do well when we don't have weight. We need weight in our lives. We need things that we are responsible for. And so I want to help you as a pastor, and I want us as a church to help others get the wrong weight off of you so that we can get the right weight on you. The word that describes this weight is calling. It's calling. When you know what God has led you to do, then you can start to understand your calling. Not your passion, not what you love, not what you're good at. I think too often we've heard the line that you should follow your heart to figure out what you should do. Figure out what you love and go and do that. But you cannot discern calling, isolating it or separating it from responsibility. So here's what I mean by that. My calling is to my wife first. It just is. Next, my calling is to my 2 kids. I cannot make any decision about who I am or what I am to become in isolation from that responsibility. And so it's under the weight of that family, it's under the weight of having a spouse, and under the weight of having kids that I can discern what God is leading me into. Wouldn't it be easier without that weight? Yeah, it would be. But I wouldn't grow. And I wouldn't live in the purpose and the calling of Jesus that makes my life have weight. It is in knowing my responsibility that I can then discern calling. And calling is first to my family, but it's not only to my family. And so when you begin to claim responsibility over an area that you were previously ignorant or apathetic towards, that is when God moves. Right? I was in a church on staff in southern Indiana along the Ohio River. And it doesn't seem to be as true for the Mississippi, but people that are along the Ohio River, those are different folk. I'll just leave it at that. They're interesting. But there was this idea there that we were only responsible for the people that we knew. There was a lady, and she told me one Sunday, she said, "I'm just so upset, Pastor." And I said, "Why?" So I was driving the other day, and as my lights came across this window, this picture window in this house, I saw they had no furniture. They had no curtains, and there were kids in there, and they only looked half clothed, and I was so upset. And I said, "Oh my goodness." And she said, "Somebody ought to do something about that." She was a lovely lady. But she missed the opportunity to have the responsibility and the weight to make a difference in someone's life because even though she was made aware of it, she was apathetic about it. And said someone should do something about that. But when you take responsibility for things that you previously didn't know about or you were apathetic about, that's when God moves. That's when God starts to move. Some people think revival, I hear a lot, we should have a revival. The church needs revival, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but some people think revival is when people who don't know God get saved. But revival, by the very nature of the world, is when the people of God already in church realize what God wants to do through them. That's when he moves, and that's when he works, is that when the people who are in partnership with God actually get into partnership with him. It's when we do things that have weight of purpose and responsibility of what we do in conjunction with God that we can have kingdom impact. I've been guilty in the past of making a low ask of people. I'll say, "Hey, if you can just give us 1 hour a month, you could do this." Or if you can just give us 1 hour a week, right? That's kind of a low ask. I say, "Hey, you know what? Like, don't worry. Like, if it's not for you, it's only 30 days and that kind of stuff." But I want us to get comfortable with a big ask, right? I want us to get comfortable with an ask that adds weight and purpose to fulfill the calling that God has on your life and my life. Because we want you, every person within earshot, we want you to be a person who people look back to and say, "My life would have gone a completely different way without them in my life." Some of you seem skeptical, but that's what taking part in the mission of God is. It's not to come to church and sing songs once a Sunday. It's to actually participate in the mission of God. And so what he's saying is, what if you were a person that someone looked back in their life and said, "My life would have gone completely different if it wasn't for that person here, or wasn't for that thing here, it wasn't for them interacting." And you don't know how it's going to turn out. You just have to be faithful in what God makes you aware of. I think that's what we need. And that's what we need as a church. And so let's talk about our weight as a church. What's the weight of the church? Not all weight is good, and not all weight is bad. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, verse 30, he said, "For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." He didn't say, "I don't have a yoke," right? He says, "My yoke is better than burden and sin and shame." But there's still a yoke. So what's your yoke? I did some research, and I looked at two different statistics, and they both agreed with one another. 65.2% of people within a 5-mile radius of this address, 2921 38th Street, if you took, how many people have, like, what is that thing called? Compass, right? And you had the pointy end and the pencil. If you took that and set it to like a 5 miles on a map and drew a circle, 65.2% of people have no religious affiliation. None. The person you work with, the person you see in the store, the person that you yell at in the other car is 65.2% likely to not have any relationship with God. And you might be saying, Pastor, 5 miles from here, you're getting over to where some of those heathens are, like over in Iowa. Or if you're from Iowa, you might be like, well, that includes a bunch of all the heathens in Illinois or whatever. Like, I don't really believe that. But I did look at another statistic and just talk about where the church is. In Rock Island County, as best can be determined, there is at most 35% of people who claim religious affiliation. To put it another way, 2 out of every 3 people you encounter don't have a relationship with God. In the 5-mile radius, how many people do you think that is? 110,386. God's calling you on the phone and saying 110,000 people are under the weight. Can you rescue them? Can you help me? Can you go and get them? Can you go and share the hope of Jesus? And they may not want to come out of that. That's not their responsibility on you, but the responsibility is to go. People have a need for connection. People have a need for community. People have a need for hope. And this is the weight that the church has. This is part of our responsibility. And so the question that we have to answer with our lives is, are we willing to accept the responsibility for the faith in the community, not just inside of these walls, but even beyond them? And can we stop being so afraid that somebody's not going to be our friend if we just say, hey, I'd love to tell you about Jesus sometime. It doesn't have to be a program. That's the problem, is like, I think sometimes we get caught up in the idea of like, well, how do I do it? Sometimes if you just share how Jesus has helped you in your own life, someone can take it or leave it. It doesn't have to be this program like, now I'm going to talk to you for the next 7.5 minutes about these 3 things. You don't have to be a presentation. But let's come to an understanding that God is doing a thing and He invites us to be part of it. You and I were made for weight. We were made for responsibility. We were not meant to be isolated. You weren't made just to pick up and do whatever you want at any point in time. There is calling on your life. You have resources available to you. You have influence. You have God-given talent. The question becomes, will you use it to further His kingdom, or will you squander the opportunity you have? As much as it depends on us as a church, we will not let the verdict on your life be you have been made and found deficient. But to do that, you have to engage the calling that God has for you. You have to take on the weight of responsibility. I don't want anybody to get confused and assume that we are a church that's built, that wants to have the best service on a Sunday morning. That's a little bit better than the church across the street or down the road or the other Nazarene church or the other Baptist church or the other whatever church. We don't care about that. I mean, we want to do things with excellence. We want to do our best in the things that we do. So we don't need to take a strengths finder test and then advertise to people what we're the best at. Because we aren't selling people on what we can do better than the church down the road. We are the people that love Jesus deeply and believe Him at His word, that He has called us for a purpose, that there are 110,000 people that are not experiencing any relationship with God right now, and so we want to take that responsibility to reach them, not go over to another church and say, hey, come over here because we have something better. That's not what we're in the business of. We're not that we're in business, but that's not what our mission is. And so I'm going to tell you, like, we've been here I'm coming up on 3 years. And we kind of just go slow on purpose. Partly is because we have the congregation size that we have. And part of it is just because, hey, let's get to know each other, let's understand the context, let's understand our calling. But this is not an idea that you and I are just coming to church to hear a message that we like or don't like. And so if you aren't already, especially going forward, I probably will not let you come in here and just sit and not ask you to engage at some point in time if you are claiming to follow Jesus Christ. Now, if you don't know Jesus, or you're getting to know Jesus, or you're seeing if, that's fine. But Jesus isn't called to be seat warmers. Jesus told his disciples to go and make disciples. And so we're not going to ignore that call today. We're saying this is what we're about. There is weight. This is what we were meant to do. Lives will be changed. Lives will be impacted by the weight God has placed on us with his calling for such a time as this. And so if you're saying, you know what, Pastor, this is all good. Like, what do you want me to do with this? What can I do with this information or this thing? And so I just want to tell you, here's the step, the easiest step you can take. Is every morning, how many of you get the newspaper in print at your house? All right. Well, it's like reading the manual of the car. I see that hand. The good thing is Donna can check in print, and everybody else, you can check online. Every day, I want you to turn to the newspaper or click to the newspaper and read the obituaries. Now, the good news, I've already done that I've already done that today. And guess what? You're not in there. You're not. Now, you might get up every morning and check and say, am I dead today? You're not in there. You're not in the obituaries, which means there's work to do in your life. There's work that God wants to do, not only in you for your benefit, but primarily through you to impact others. And so where a lady sees kids in a picture window and says somebody ought to do something about that, I'm calling you to be that person and say, I'm going to be that somebody. I'm going to do that. I'm going to be that person that accepts that responsibility. I'm that person that's going to add that weight to my shoulders, not because it is easy, not because it isn't complicated, because you know what? When you get involved in the lives of others, it's pretty messy at times. And it's going to be unorganized, and it's going to be possibly all over the place. But you have to be willing, for the sake of the weight that they're trapped under, that Jesus says, I have you in position to accept that. And so we as a church, I believe, we need to gain weight. These past 3 years, we've done some great programs, and people have felt, I think, overall, pretty welcomed. That's been our goal, to make it a church of hospitality. But what's more hospitable than saying, let me take some of that weight off your shoulders? Let me give you a good weight to carry. Right? There's nothing we can do better for a person than introduce them to the hope of Jesus Christ and to take the weight of sin and shame and anger and bitterness off of theirs. And so let's endeavor to do that today, tomorrow, this year, and beyond. Because there is work to do in our lives. And as long as we have breath in our lungs, then there is a calling to responsibility. And so I love you all. I'm excited to be here with you. Not just like today, which I am, but like God has put us into a place uniquely to carry certain weight that nobody else is going to carry. And maybe we can't reach 110,000 people tomorrow, but I bet there's at least one who you're going to interact with this week. And you could choose to share Jesus in one way or another. And I don't mean you have to give them a speech. Like, people need to know they matter. And that there's different ways than what they've experienced to carry. And I think Jesus is an answer. Will you stand with me?